Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Bets and Banter. And today on the show, we are, of course, talking about UFC Vegas 82, and it's headlined by a middleweight matchup between the Bear Jew, Paul Craig, and Brendan Allen on a 5-fight win streak, surging in the middleweight division. Very exciting matchup, and it's a big card. A lot of fights, a lot to break down. So without further ado, let's bring in our guest for today. If you're new here, my name's Liam. I pick fights on this channel each and every week, and on Bets and Banter, we bring along a special guest. His name is Rich. Just win, baby. Back to the show, my man. How you doing this week?
Yo, what's up, Liam? Yeah, ready to get into it, man. Last week it was disappointing. For those who don't know, Jerry was my max bet, so it was a bit of a sour note to end the card on. But we had some highlights. Caught the draw in the Borishev fight on Draj, Gordon in the distance, so it kind of negated that a little bit. So I was kind of broke even on the night. But yeah, ready to go this week, man.
I love it. And some people are shouting out and noticing. I did give a shave to the beard. I don't know what came over me. I think it was something to do with that meme that was going around of Yuri and Alex when you lend your friend a razor and then they come back, with a big ass beard years later and never return it. That was the meme I kept seeing on Twitter. And I was like, you know what? In honor of Yuri taking the L, I'm shaving off the beard. We're starting fresh this week because we got a lot of great fights to break down. So without further ado, we've got a, absolute banger to start us off. On short notice, we got Christian Leroy Duncan taking on, shout out to Lenny Main, just showing love to Just Win Baby and Liam. Appreciate you hugely. Thank you so much for the dono, bro. It means a lot, and we appreciate the support. Sharpest chat in the game each and every time. So the beard will be growing back. Don't worry about it, to my guy Joe. But in any case, guys, great fights. Let's start off. Christian Leroy Duncan on short notice here. He was supposed to have a different opponent. Cesar Almeida, Extreme Couture product, a guy who had fought in kickboxing. And I was pretty interested, honestly, Rich. He was like plus 118. And I was thinking, this guy just proved on Contender Series he could fight 15 minutes and he could deal with the grappling from a guy who I thought, had shown a lot of pretty decent grappling tape in the lead up. So for me, I had bet on Cesar Almeida in that spot, or at least picked him as an underdog, said that there was betting value on his line. Contender Series a little finicky here in the great state of New York. But in any case, I was thinking he was going to have to get it done by knockout in that spot, and he ended up doing it by decision. Now, completely different matchup, but Tulian is a primary striker, so that is the similarity here, for the Duncan side. And Duncan, to me, he really let people down last time out, right? He came out there, really shitty performance, right? Just didn't put on a lot of offense. But I do think Tulian's the kind of guy who forces offense out of people. He kind of brings the fight, likes to get in somebody's face, start throwing. And so when I'm thinking about this matchup on paper, Rich, I feel like Christian Leroy Duncan, he's just got better cardio. He's a more consistent fighter. And so I think that Tulian is either going to, maybe clip him early or just spend himself seeking victory. And I don't think he's got good cardio in the best of circumstances. And I think on short notice, it's going to be particularly exacerbated. So Duncan, who didn't do anything in his last fight, may actually have an opportunity to finish here, kind of get that redemptive moment, come back into the win column. And I think that if you were fighting Cesar Almeida, and if I'm in that position, I'm going to be working on my wrestling. I'm going to be working on my grappling. I'm going to try and take him to the ground, make him less comfortable. Now you've got a guy in Tulian who's completely uncomfortable on the mat, always has been. I think that the smart path to victory and the path of least resistance is Duncan taking this to the mat and either beating him up or submitting him. So I think Duncan's going to get the win here. Rich, how do you feel?
Yeah, I'm glad this one got booked, to be honest, because I didn't like the original matchup. Thankfully, I didn't break it down. I hate that, you break down a fight and then it gets cancelled. But I'm not really interested in this bout, to be honest. Like you said, Duncan, he was a letdown in his debut against Petrosian. Who knows what version we're going to get out of him here. Maybe he shows some IQ and he implements some grappling. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's just a bum and we see the same kind of performance last time. I don't want to put my money on him to find out which Duncan's going to show up. So it's a complete pass from me. I don't want to touch the fight in any way, man. So yeah, I got nothing, man.
Yeah, and I just peeked over at Best Fight Odds. It seems like the opening line here on the U.S. domestics is about minus 385. No, thank you. I'll wait for the prop menu to open up. If there's a ridiculous number on Duncan by sub, or the ends by sub, something like that. That's probably what I'll look to take, just because Duncan, I'm not sure that his grappling is going to be better, but I just know that Tululian's a guy that finds a way out in difficult fights down the stretch. And so if they price it like, oh, it's going to be a striking battle, that's potentially the way I'll look to get involved. But otherwise, I don't feel compelled to play this one either. Shout out to a friend of the program, Uncle Wheezy. What's good, fellas? What's good, Uncle Wheezy? Appreciate you being here, brother. We're just getting started. So without further ado, let's move it to the next fight on the card. This was supposed to be the curtain jerker. Instead, we've got the Duncan fight taking that spot. So now Lucas Alexander versus Jeka Saragih at the featherweight class will be the second fight of the night. Rich, why don't you start us off with this one, brother?
Yeah, this is a fight I'm interested in. The line has blown out a little bit for Alexander. It's getting a bit ridiculous. It was at -500 at one point. I was worried that Jeka wouldn't make weight, but Perry's Instagram, you know, he's got abs all of a sudden. So it looks like he's going to make weight at 145 for the first time. I don't know whether that's going to compromise him. His cardio is notoriously shit anyway. So, yeah, I like Alexander. I can't touch the money line. I'm going to be looking at some props. The sub was something ridiculous when it opened, plus 650. Thought that was super wide. KO was -125, if I'm not mistaken. But I think if he plays it smart here, Alexander, he's got an easy dub. Notoriously, he likes to fight on the outside. He's a point fighter. But if he's done any type of research, he knows to take this guy down. He's a white belt on the mat. He lost to Jubilee in his debut. You all know how I feel about Jubilee. So that was a pretty disgusting performance. But yeah, to break Jeka down, he's got a right outside calf kick, likes a left high kick now and again, and he's got a para straight right hand, which he's knocked a couple of people out regionally. But yeah, it's the grappling for me. If you push him to the fence, it's in the apex, the small cage. Push him to the fence. You got a 3-inch height advantage. The metrics are all on Alexander's side. I think once he gets mount, it'll be over shortly after. Hopefully it'll be the submission over the KO man, and that 650 will cash.
Yeah, and what's interesting is Lucas Alexander 0-3 career to the submission, and I think that's why you're seeing that plus 600 number. But it's not always about, you know, how good are you at submission grappling. It's how good are you at submission grappling relative to your opponent. And that's the only thing that really matters in mixed martial arts. And so I do think that in this case, you know, he may be the better grappler just pure out, right? You look at the guys that he trains with at Fusion XL. They're world-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, many of them, you know, like elite black belts, a lot of the guys he trains with. So you'd think that they'd be giving him, you know, a pretty sound game plan here. Hey, go out there, take this guy to the ground, make it easy on yourself. The one thing that scares me here, Jeka Saragih, he's a big social media guy, you know, comes from a part of the world that's not really represented much in the UFC. When I think of like young Brazilian prospects, Lucas Alexander isn't a guy that really stands out to me. You know, we saw Joanderson, Brito treated him accordingly. Granted, that was on short notice, but still, I just felt like the gap in physicality and aggression there is huge. I feel like if they ran that back, Joanderson, Brito probably treats him the same way. But when you look at the wins, you know, Jacob Kilburn, UFC name, maybe not UFC level, right? Steven Peterson, he's a guy that's got a lot of experience, but I believe he retired after the bout. So maybe just didn't have his head in the game fully for that one. So those are a couple of the things that give me pause here, where I'm like, could we just see an underperformance from a guy who's now suddenly -500 when nobody wanted a piece of him, you know, his last couple fights. But I also just look at the fact here that he should have a big advantage on the ground. So it would be a submission play for me or a money line shot on the underdog here. You know, either way, you're getting huge plus money. And I do think that Jeka has big power. You know, that's the one thing I'll point out. It's like, I thought that he impressed on the road to UFC because nobody expected him to win those fights either. He has come through as a dog before. And last time out, Jubilee was starting to get tagged up on the feet, I felt like, and he was like, all right, let me take this to the mat. And so I don't know if Lucas Alexander is going to do that, but if he does, I think it's going to look easy. So it's an IQ test here. Let's see if Lucas Alexander can pass it. But Jeka Saragih, I will just say, you know, seems like a fun guy that the UFC could get behind. If he could get a couple wins, just doesn't seem like he's UFC level, and seems like a lot to ask to close the gap here in terms of the wrestling and the grappling when he seems so green in that realm of the fight last time out.
Yeah, a couple of things to mention on that. If you look at the original opponent he was booked with, I believe it was Butler, the jiu-jitsu guy. So the UFC, they was already giving him a unfavorable matchup, a guy who was going to take him down and get the submission. So I don't think they give a shit about him, to be honest. I don't think his ceiling's high. Yeah, he might have a social media following and be from a part of the world maybe the UFC wants to break into. But so was Jubilee, man. And look how that one worked out. And I may or may not have provided Alexander with a breakdown for this opponent. So we'll see how it goes, man.
Yeah, hopefully he takes some good advice, right? Next up, we've got Charles Johnson taking on Rafael Estevam. And this is a fight that, truthfully, I haven't gotten to do as much research as I would like to. I'll continue to do that throughout the week. What I did note is that it seems like Rafael Estevam is constantly working on his ground game. He's a guy that's training in and out of the gi, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at Novo União. So he does seem like a guy who's probably going to have a good pedigree on the mat. I think he's probably going to have a superior ground game to somebody like Charles Johnson. So, the question that I have is how is his gas tank going to translate in this fight? Last time out had those weight incidents, with the Zhalgas Zhumagulov fight, caused the fight to be scrapped. So I want to see him make weight comfortably in this spot. But I do think he's probably the side here. Charles Johnson just hasn't been very effective with his offense at the UFC level. What I think could make him a live underdog here is the fact he's got a lot of experience. He stays poised out there, difficult to finish. So he could always stay live into that third round. But I'm not sure where his finishing instincts are at, at the UFC level either. It doesn't seem like he's really putting a lot of guys in danger of closing the show. So for me, those are a couple problems for him here against Estevam. And I think Estevam just on paper tracks to me as a more dangerous guy. So more dangerous guy. I think he's probably got the advantage on the ground. Think he can mix in some wrestling here. So I think it's a tough fight for Charles Johnson. How do you feel, Rich?
Yeah, I think overs are good in this one. I think it probably is an Estevam decision. I don't think he's going to finish Johnson. Nobody really does finish Johnson. I don't think he's ever been finished in his career. He's got really bad takedown defense. We know that much. But he does get back up to his feet. He's not going to accept bottom position. The only reason I can't pull the trigger on Estevam or even take a shot on the decision is the decision prop is disgusting. It's like plus 130, plus 140. I don't like that number for a prop. And it could get dicey, man, in round 3. Johnson, he's got good cardio. He's not going to give up. And this Estevam guy, he rarely fights, man. He fights once a year. That's not good. He's making his debut. His game is all about taking people down, controlling them, and trying to wear them down. I don't think he's going to be able to do that to Johnson to the point where Johnson's going to give up. So yeah, I just think it's going to get really dicey in round 3, man. I can even see a scenario where Johnson finishes him in round 3. That's not out of this world. So for that reason, I'm staying away from it, man. Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, it should be an Estevam decision.
Yeah, this is a fight I'm not supremely bullish on. Charles Johnson on a 2-fight losing skid, so he's got moved down the card. But again, we talk about it sometimes. Guys have their back against the wall, probably needs this win to keep his UFC career going. So going to get a highly motivated Charles Johnson here, but just don't know if he has enough potent offense to translate at this UFC level based on what we've seen so far. So for me, I'm comfortable passing here and moving along to the next fight where we've got a bantamweight scrap between Chad Anheliger and Jose Johnson. And I believe I started off the last one. So Rich, why don't you start us off here with the Anheliger and Johnson fight?
Yeah, to be honest, this was another fight that I didn't really care about. This was the only bout that I spoke to you about, and you've kind of got me on the Chad side a little bit, but I'm not sure, man. I don't know whether I can get there or not. I do think it's a shit show of a fight. From tape, Chad, he likes to keep it standing. I'd say he's pretty much a boxer. He doesn't really push the wrestling from what I've seen in the fights. But to be fair, I didn't go all the way back to regionals. He does have a black belt himself. Likes to drop to guillotines a lot when he's pressured in the takedowns. But Johnson's just really bad, man. He's still a young kid. If I'm right, he's only 28 still. Yeah, 28. And he's had 23 fights, man. Whenever he's fought somebody half decent, he's lost. So I can see why people were back Chad at like plus 160 or whatever he is. But I don't know whether I'm going to get there myself. But yeah, I'd say Chad's got the upside. He's got the cardio. Yeah, I don't know whether I'm going to pull the trigger, man. But yeah, not too much for me on this one. But I know you like the fight.
Yeah, what I find interesting about this fight is, there's a huge size disparity, right? There's an age disparity. And I think that for those reasons, it's going to attract a lot of people to the Jose Johnson side, and I get it. He's a big guy, maybe he's got the power advantage here, but I think both guys hit with some power. So I think he's got the length, he's going to have some size. Maybe he can hit Chad from further away. But I also think that when you look at some of these past fights, there's been examples of guys that really tried to wrestle Chad, like Muin Gafurov, and Chad got the better of a lot of those wrestling exchanges. Some of them, like you mentioned, he pulled the guillotine, ends up, falling to his back. Doing a couple things that, could cost you rounds, could cost you decisions potentially. However, he used it to sweep at a few points as well. He created some danger for Muin Gafurov when he was attempting the takedowns, and I thought made him uncomfortable, also tired him out pretty significantly in that fight. And what people forget about that fight is that, Chad drops him in the first round. So when he's theoretically at his best, at his freshest, he goes for the takedowns. He gets some takedowns going, but he's unable to hold Chad down. Chad gets back up to his feet and then drops him with a knee in the clinch. And Gafurov, he's never been knocked out before, never been finished with strikes. So he's a tough guy. He got submitted. I think that was his first ever loss inside the distance against Said Nurmagomedov. But you look at who else was really close to finishing. Chad Anheliger dropped him in the first round. And then by round 3, I thought that Chad was the fresher guy, and I thought he won a close third round there as well. So for me, Chad is a scrapper. He's a really tough guy. We've seen him with his back up against the wall a number of times, getting beat up and then find a way to win, right? Even in the Jesse Schrader fight, he was kind of showboating a little bit, dancing around. And then when it was time to get serious in round 3, he put 2 big knockdowns on Jesse Schrader and finished the fight. And I thought that, that last fight against Alatong Haley, I told people, I was like, guys, I love Chad Anheliger. I'm out, right? Like, this is just a bad matchup for him. It's a guy who's got a similar enough body type, but instead of being loosey-goosey and moving around, he's just very stiff in the neck. He can come forward, throw big shots, land with authority, and take the shots coming back a little bit better. And so Chad actually slips backwards in that fight. You could see it on a left hook, and it just bonks his nose, and he starts gushing blood. It's in the first round. And I think that finishes a lot of people. His nose is broken. A lot of people just start covering up and just sit against the fence. And Chad was like, all right, time to go. Starts sitting down on his punches, starts throwing back with big shots. And he did try to wrestle a little bit in that fight, but he just realized after he got a hold of Alatong Ali, got to a body lock. I'll send you the screenshots. And he just couldn't do anything with him, right? He couldn't move him. The one thing that stood out to me about Jose Johnson is he's very easy to take down. Just watching his tape, he's a very big, tall, long guy in this bantamweight division. And Chad doesn't often, attempt takedowns, right? I think that if Chad attempted takedowns, this line would probably be different. But he has attempted just a handful of takedowns in the UFC. And I think that that's a little bit opponent dependent. He likes to box. He feels comfortable with his boxing. But I think in this fight, if you know the assignment, you don't want to box with somebody who's this long and tall. So I think that what Chad should be doing is closing the distance and trying to get a hold of this guy and put him on the ground. If you go back and watch the Jack Cartwright fight, I thought that Jose Johnson looked terrible on the mat. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but just like Jack Cartwright took him down, passed his guard, attempted a submission, attempted another submission, and it looked like he was going to submit him in the first, 95 seconds of that fight. Then he gassed out his arms, and he just started to look like a shell of himself. And I just don't see that from Chad Anheliger. I've seen him fight really hard for 15 minutes. So I feel like Chad is going to come out here and put on a decent performance. He's got, what's his name? Hakeem Dawodu as a primary training partner for this fight. Seems like a guy who can mirror a lot of the same tactics. Muay Thai striker, long, tall, featherweight type of build. And I feel like that's the right idea for Chad here is to, no, I need to go ahead, grab a hold of this guy, take him to the mat. So, for me, it's a very fun scrap. It's a good fight. Lean towards the under, lean towards Chad as the side. But I just think that it's a hell of a scrap. I think both these guys are capable of finishing the fight. But you've got one guy who's been finished with strikes. It wasn't that long ago. Mana Martinez kind of struggled at the UFC level. He put this guy out in the first round. I admit he's got big power. I think Chad does too. And so I think Chad could potentially catch him with his power. I think he could potentially drop him. But I also think if he pursues takedowns, he can get takedowns here. So it's a great scrap. And I think that we're going to find out a lot of questions. Can Chad chain wrestle for 15? I'm not sure. But I think Chad could finish him on the mat. I truly believe that. So we'll have to see. But watching the exchanges in the Muin Gafurov fight, it was a high pace scrambling affair. And Chad Anheliger was the older guy there by a considerable margin, and everybody counted him out. Line kept going one way. And there was just me over there like, I think Chad Anheliger is going to win this one. And I think that Chad Anheliger is going to win this one. So that's my gut feeling. Could be dead wrong. Been wrong many times, but I'm an underdog guy, and I like Chad Anheliger. I've never lost a Chad Anheliger bet, and I'm going back to the well with him this time. Next up, Jonathan Pearce is taking on Joanderson Brito at 145 pounds. And Joanderson Brito, I can't say the same. I've had mixed results with him. I bet him against Bill Algeo. I was stunned that he lost that fight. But then I was like, you know what? When everybody's selling their stock, I'm taking the plus 250 for as much as they'll take on this guy, Joanderson Brito. Big cash for me, 10-unit score, plus 250 against Andre Fili. So Joanderson Brito, he's got that big power in his hands. He's got some grappling ability. You know, he could really mix up his skills. We saw him dominate Diego Lopes for the majority of their fight. Lopes obviously offered up some dangerous submissions, kept it scrambly, kept it honest, but a lot of damage absorbed over the course of that fight. Brito was putting it on him. He was holding him down. He got easy takedowns throughout the fight. Made me think that Sabatini could replicate some of that success. Obviously, Lopes getting better, but the other thing is Brito is obviously a freak of physicality. Just grabbed him and sunned him to the mat, right? Whereas Pat Sabatini gets in on a double leg, gets hit with the hips. Just a different story of physicality. So I feel like when I'm looking at this guy, Joanderson Brito, he's a problem for most guys at 145. You know, he hits very hard and he's got good grappling. So as long as his cardio can check out, which you kind of give somebody a pass, in my view, when it's a UFC debut and it's a cardio monster like Bill Algeo, and he takes your shots early. And by the way, the early wrestling exchanges were all going to Brito, but that was just a mistake from him. He should have been letting go and punching him in the head as opposed to trying to wrestle with this guy and then fatiguing himself, giving up easy takedowns late in the fight because he kind of gassed out there. So I think that Brito gassing out is the biggest concern for him here, but I definitely think this is another live underdog type of spot where Joanderson Brito at plus 110, you know, I'm considering that against a lot of featherweights because he hits extremely hard. When there's plus money by this guy's name, I'm interested. You know, most of the time he's a very dangerous fighter. How do you feel, Rich?
Yeah, the line's a bit suspect on this one. I would have expected Brito to be more of a favorite in this one, but yeah, the line's weird, man. But you kind of covered it, bro. Yeah, he's a very physical Brito. I think that's going to be a problem here for Pearce. What I didn't like about Pearce is when he strikes, he's very slow with his punches and he's very hittable when it comes to the defense as well. And that's just going to be a problem with someone like Brito who likes to bum rush you. And, you know, in the apex cage as well, where there's not much movement allowance, you know, I think it's going to be a big problem. So I wouldn't be surprised if Brito puts him out in round one, like he has with his last couple of opponents. But they have been questionable. They've been on short notice. Alexander, Wilson, Fili, he put him out within a minute or so. So, yeah, it just depends about the IQ from Pearce here. He is from Fight Ready, so it would depend on his game plan. Obviously, if you're smart, you do the Bill Algeo blueprint here and, you know, take him into deep water, Brito. But I don't know whether Pearce can do it, man. Even in his debut against Joe Lozon, he's shown deficiencies in the grappling department wrestling when he was facing somebody with, you know, decent grappling themselves. So I think Brito's the side, to be honest. People in the chat were asking about a draw in the Jose fight. I think this one has potential draw on it if people are into that kind of shit. Obviously, Brito early, he could smash him in round one, get a 10-8, not get his finished, and then gas out in the later rounds. But yeah, 3 sub losses for Pearce. That's not good either. Obviously, we've seen Brito, he's got decent jiu-jitsu, he's just strong with it. So yeah, given all that, man, I'd say Brito's the side, and I think the number's quite nice. Just have a look what it is now. Yes, still underdog, man. Plus 105. It just makes me wary when you look at a line like that, when you think Brito's got the upside and you go look at the odds and expect him to be like minus 180 or something, and he's fucking an underdog. But yeah, Brito's the side for me, man.
Yeah, one thing that I'm looking at here is like when I'm looking at Andre Fili, if he was to fight JSP today, what is the line on that fight? You know, because I feel like a lot of people would be thinking, you know, Andre Fili's got a lot of experience. He knows how to wrestle, you know, all this stuff. And he's got good cardio. And then that's a lot of what they were telling me before he fought Brito. And then Brito just splattered him like a bug on a windshield. So that's the one thing where I just feel like if somebody was to lose this fight in round one in embarrassing fashion, it is definitely more likely to be the JSP side, in my view. However, the longer the fight goes, I do think he becomes live. So for me, if I'm on the Pearce side, one thing I might look to do is get in live after round one. Gobbler thinks that Brito gets dominated. Well, then you get in right now, brother. But if you think that, Brito might win the first round, but then slow down over the course, then I think that there is a potential live betting opportunity for Pearce backers here. And you kind of avoid that potential round one, windshield analogy. So I think that that's something to consider here. On the other side of things, you can only fight who is willing to step in front of you, right? I think it was Melsik Bagdasaryan broke his hand in the lead up to that fight. Kusein Askabov suffered an injury as well. So everybody was kind of backing out of those fights. And I think that this is a guy that the UFC can get behind. One thing to note about him as well, Joanderson Brito, he kind of brings the style that Dana is loving to push up the card. And so we've seen in the UFC, Sean O'Malley wasn't beating the top contenders before he got pushed up the card. He was just styling on people that he was much better than. They're happy to do that. And when they're looking for these young Brazilian stars, I do think Joanderson Brito checks a lot of boxes for me. Both these guys have a similar amount of experience, but 3 years younger here for the Joanderson Brito side. And despite being a little bit shorter, he's going to have the longer reach here as well. So fun fight, great scrap, well-matched fight. But I think that Brito, a little bit more dangerous. I think he's going to close the show. Next up, we've got Mick Parkin taking on Caio Machado at 265 pounds. And I was gutted, Rich. I think I went back and forth about 50 times on the Saflarski and Machado fight because on the one hand, Machado had never fought anybody, right? But on the other hand, Saflarski just looked like he wasn't very physically fit and intimidating. So I was like, man, I don't know who to go with here. And I went back and forth and struggled with it all week. Machado was an easy click in that fight because Saflarski was just fraudulent, right? But now you look at this and he is a big underdog here. But should he be? I think probably is the right answer. The question I have is what happens if Machado gets him to the ground? Because I do think heavyweights are really bad on the ground historically, just as a rule. And Parkin was able to reverse Neves and then get that choke. But Neves, we've seen, hasn't really ascended to that next level, right? He's still putting his game together. He's still a young guy working on his skills. So I think of that Mick Parkin win as impressive. I bet him there as an underdog. But then that fight with Pogues, I'm not sure how much it really tells me. Pogues, they fly him over overseas, right? He looked out of shape for that fight. Just in my view, didn't seem like he really showed up with that 15 minutes to go. So he kind of just didn't fight that hard for the full 15. He kind of just held back, threw a couple jabs. I don't know that he really pushed the pace. That's kind of what I expect from Machado here as well. But if he was to get the fight to the mat, I think that's the only place that this fight could become interesting. So for me, on the feet, I probably just favor Parkin to try harder, to care more about the outcome, and to throw more volume with the jabs. But I don't really have very strong feelings here, Rich. How do you feel?
Yeah, I think after the fact, we could be saying that Machado is one of the worst in the division, man. That Dana White Contender Series fight was just disgusting to watch. You just seen the way it was going after round one. Obviously, Dana doesn't want to reward that. I think he likes Parkin. They gave him his debut in London, which he won against Pogues. Yeah, Pogues came in fat and didn't perform well. But it was a half-decent win for Parkin, especially in his debut. So he's got that going for him. I do think they fight kind of similar, these two. They're very patient, like the low kicks. But the one thing that was noticeable from tape on Machado is he leaves his hands super low, man, especially his left hand. So, he's there to be countered. And I don't think Parkin is worthy of like minus 300, whatever it is. But I do think he's the side here, whether it's the KO or the decision. The decision's 275, which is quite nice. But I'd say he probably clips him at some point. I keep saying it, man. It's the apex, smaller cage, allows for finishes. And both guys are used to this environment as well, obviously coming off the Dana White Contender Series. But yeah, I think Parkin probably clips him at some point and gets the KO, man. But yeah, again, not a fight I'm really interested in. A lot of shit fights on this card, man.
I'm thinking about, you just pointed out Parkin round three or decision is plus 175. So if you don't want to get scooped on that decision plus 275. You can drop it $1 and give yourself that 3rd round equity as well. Just a thought, but most heavyweight finishes either materialize early or end up dragging to a disgusting decision. So maybe it's not as good as equity as you'd need there, but in any case, I don't have stronger thoughts on that fight. So we can move.
Sorry.
Oh no, please go ahead.
One more thing to mention from Machado. If you look at his pre-UFC fights, man, he fought a 45-year-old, a 56-year-old, some 36-year-old bum, and then he went and fought the 56-year-old again. So his pre-UFC tape is disgusting as can be.
Hey, they were all better than Saflarski, though. Can we agree on that?
Well, yeah, that's true.
Age is just a number, Rich, right? Robbie Lawler proved it to us all. But in any case, yeah, they're not very high level. The Canadian regional scene kind of notoriously bad. And so you see Machado, Caio Machado, you're like, man, Brazilian regionals, BFL, look into it. No, I'm playing. We wish them the best at BFL, but I definitely think he's got a lot still to prove at this UFC level. So without further ado, let's talk about the next fight between bantamweights here in the women's side of things. We got Lucie Pudilova taking on Ailin, Perez, and Rich. I feel like this one's burning a hole in your chest, so please go ahead and fire off.
Yeah, I think Perez is the side. I don't know whether that's fucking a hot take or not, but I think she's going to get it done, man. The grappling. What I don't like about Pudilova is I remember her from her UFC days, man. She was a stand-up girl, wanted to strike, and the problem was girls were taking her down, and that's how she was losing bouts. She even got finished by Antonia Shevchenko in one of her fights. But since she's come back to the UFC, you know, she's a wrestler now. She's taken down Edwards, Wu, who are nothing to write home about. I think we've all seen plenty of their fights. They're some of the worst in the division. And she lost the Edwards fight, whether you think it was justified or not. It was a split decision loss. But yeah, I don't like to see this from a man, this grappling game. I don't think she can do that against Perez. If she does try and do it, she's probably going to get reversed. Perez is strong, albeit a bit of a, I don't want to be too disparaging, man, but she's a bit of an idiot. But she is decent with a game. You know, she's got them thick thighs. She can take people down. She can lay on them. She had Edgar in her debut in the UFC. Edgar, she's a good judoka, jiu-jitsu player. So that was just a bad style matchup from her. Again, it was her debut, man. Jitters. No shame in taking your first L. But I think she's going to win this fight. What I'm interested in is she going to get her finish? I'd be inclined to say that she is. Again, Apex, small cage. She's going to be able to press Pudilova. I think she's going to fuck her up in round 1. I think she's going to get deterred Pudilova. I seen in the Edwards fight in round 3, she wasn't liking it. I think Edwards, that was the reason why she won round 3. Pudilova gassed a little bit. She gets down on herself. She needed a pep talk in the corner mid-rounds. And I think against someone like Perez, when they're just laying on you, and Perez isn't a finisher, but she will chip away with some shots. Come round 2, round 3, I think Pudilova's going to doubt herself and she's going to get finished. I think it's likely to be a TKO. Perez doesn't have the best jiu-jitsu. I'd say she's probably a blue belt at best, maybe even a white belt, man. So yeah, I think it's probably a TKO and just a case of Pudilova giving up in there, to be honest, and the ref calling it off. Hopefully we get a decent ref as well. Mark Smith would be nice. He likes to call these things off early. But yeah, her fight against Ashley Evans-Smith was decent to me. Ashley Evans-Smith, I know she's got one foot out the door and she was ready to retire, but she's a decent wrestler, man. And Perez had a way with her all 3 rounds, so she's got a good decision under her belt. Yeah, Perez is the one for me. And also Pudilova, she's coming from Ireland now, so she's got to make the travel. This is just added things on the Perez side, man. So yeah, I like her, man. I missed the line though, unfortunately. She opened up, I want to say, well, she opened up underdog, but that's if you got the opener. And then she was something like -120, stuck around for a minute, and then she went up to -180, -190, whatever she is now, man.
Yeah, and I don't feel like I need to get involved on the Perez money line, but I definitely think that she wins this fight. You know, Lucie Pudilova, fine fighter, but I thought she was going to beat Jocelyn Edwards. I thought that was kind of a layup fight for her, and to go out there and kind of just leave it on the table, I thought she won that fight. I thought she deserved to win that. But in any case, I just look at a girl like Ailin Perez, and I think she's gotten much better really quickly. I think if you look at her regional tape, she was raw aggression and physicality. And I was like, when I look at, women's MMA, I'm just thinking to myself, that's going to get you far. Being really aggressive, wanting to win, being physical, that will take you pretty far in the women's side of the game. And I think that when you look at how she performed in her last fight, it was another example of that, right? She goes from being a girl that primarily is out there on the feet, mixing it up with the strikes and only using her wrestling and grappling defensively for the most part, but ending up on top of a lot of women regionally. Then she was using it, to great effect offensively, taking her down, beating her up, and just controlling the fight, dominating the positions. That's kind of what you want, especially if you're betting on somebody as a favorite. I feel like she had opportunities to finish that fight and maybe didn't take advantage because she wanted to prove to herself, hey, I can go 15 minutes, forgot the cardio. I think she might take a little bit more risks in this fight. And I look at a girl like Pudilova and I just say to myself, number one, the octagon fight somebody was talking about before, I want to bring that up. That was a great comment from Andrew. He said Pudilova has a big issue with physicality even in the octagon days. Absolutely, right? And one of the things that you notice is she did a lot of these fights, and I'm sure you saw this as well, Rich, but there's fights that she's done where it's like they get a takedown 10 seconds later, the ref's like, all right, back up to your feet. That's not going to happen here. Perez is just probably going to pass the guard. So I feel like when you look at a girl like Perez, what did she show in her last fight? She can keep mat returning, or she could just keep dominating from top position, keep working, not get the fight stood up. So she went from MMA Masters to Goat Shed. She went from Argentina, I believe, to the U.S., getting good training in consistently with good training partners. She worked with Colby Covington, Themba Garimbo, a bunch of people that are UFC level fighters. So for me, I just feel like Pudilova, not a bad fighter, but when you're dropping close decisions to Jocelyn Edwards, it doesn't really tell me you're moving in the right direction. Her record overall in the UFC is just very poor. As an underdog, she's never won. So I think that those are a couple of things that are big glaring red flags for me. And so while, like I said, I'm not advocating go push all your chips in on Ailin Perez, I just feel like Ailin Perez wants it better. I feel like she hits a little bit harder. I feel like she's the more aggressive girl. And I think that if one girl dominates with top position throughout this fight, it's more likely to be her. So that's what I feel about this fight.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of from last week, Jared Gordon versus Mark Madsen. It's not so much about the finishing upside from Gordon, because we know Gordon isn't a finisher, but it's just the fact that Madsen, he's ready to retire. Last fight in his contract, the rest of it. And that's what I like about Perez, man. She's young, up and coming. She's tenacious. She wants to win. She's early in her career. Where Pudilova, she's done this all before, man. She is only 29, but she's deep into the MMA game. And I just think once she faces some adversity, she will have some quit in her, and it will lead to a finish from Perez, man. So yeah, I think that was important to know.
Awesome. So with that being said, we agree that Ailin Perez is probably going to get the job done here. I do want to leave one note as we leave this fight. I'm kind of interested in the fight not to go the distance rather than Perez ITD as a rule. And the reason I say that, Rich, she has a cut on her face. I don't know if you saw this. I like buying bad news typically, right? They're talking about, oh, she's got a cut on her face. I'm like, oh, sick. She's going to win and the line's going to come down, right? But in any case, what I really think about is like, how could they screw me? I always think about that before the fight, before I place my money down, especially on a favorite. How could they screw me? What if the cut opens up a little more in incidental contact, right? The side of the glove, like Vitor Belfort and freaking Randy Couture back in the day. It just slides past, leaves a gash, and the fight's over shortly thereafter. I don't want to get screwed. So that's the one thing I would say is at plus 200 or whatever it is for the fight not to go the distance. That's something I'm going to look at because she does have that cut pre-existing coming into the fight. And I know how they could screw me. They could screw me 10 different ways to Sunday. So that's one thing I'm going to consider here as well. Even if it's like a hedge against another bet that I have, that's just something I'm going to consider. So I do like violence here as a potential bet. And if we were to ever see Perez lose a fight, I think it's probably going to be for making a really catastrophic error, ending up in the bottom mount and just getting beat up and submitted or something like that. But she's really tough. So I think more often than not, she's the one finishing here, but I'm just not trying to get screwed on a TKO doctor stoppage because she's got a cut on her face. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, let's move to the next one here, where we've got Nikolas Motta taking on Trey Ogden. And this is another fight that I think you're probably a little bit more bullish than me. So I'll give a quick synopsis and kick it over to you, Rich. But we've got Motta here, who's got hands on the feet, right? He likes to go out there and throw, but he's just not very durable. That's like his big problem at the highest levels. He struggled with it a little bit regionally. He struggled with it since he got to the UFC in his last couple of fights. But the guys that he's fighting, you can give him a little bit of a pass, right? Manuel Torres, he's a monster. He's absolutely huge. Just a really big physical frame. Looks like he's on all the steroids in the world. And then Jim Miller was having a lot of success in that fight, but he also is a guy that is very good in the first round. You know, you start off with Jim Miller, and he's going to come out there. I think even Dustin Poirier was out there getting his leg kicked halfway off his body, but then he was able to pick it up as the fight goes on. Jim, between Lyme disease and being 40, my man just can't keep it up for the full 15 minutes these days. But Jim Miller in round 1 and 2, he can knock out a young prospect. He could send them to the shadow realm. So absolutely no problem there. The win over Cameron Van Camp doesn't tell me a ton. I believe my man's pursuing bare knuckle MMA or bare knuckle fighting of some kind now. So we wish him the best, but really didn't cut it at the UFC level. Now for Trey Ogden, he's produced as an underdog, Rich. That's one thing that I always look at how people have done in the past, but that Zell Huber fight is where he made all that money, right? And that was just a weird fight, right? They kind of just stood there and watched each other for 15 minutes, let the fight pass them by. So I feel like this is a fight where I don't have a great feel. What I do worry about is that I've heard from a number of fighters in interviews and all this stuff that Trey Ogden's just a guy that like makes these weird fights with everybody. He does it in sparring. He like makes these weird feints and weird kicks and stuff that just kind of draws people into these slower paced fights. I do worry about that a little bit. I think if somebody was to dominate this fight with grappling, it's much more likely to be the Trey Ogden side. So those are things that make me somewhat interested on the underdog. But then it's Trey Ogden, right? And the one thing I told you in the DMs as well is Ogden stinks. You know, at the end of the day, that was just my read on him when he got to the UFC. I think he got submitted by Thomas Gifford twice, if my memory is serving me, with that same guillotine choke multiple times. So I just don't know that he has the IQ, you know, and when he's gone out there and been able to slow down a fight, he's done well. But I do worry about what happens if he starts getting hit in this fight cleanly. You know, I feel like Motta could just win a decision here potentially. So I don't like the idea of Motta at chalk because I want durability at chalk. That's like one of my number one rules. But I'm just thinking in this spot, like this is a guy in Motta who probably should win this fight on volume and striking. But I feel like he's a banana peel guy. Now go ahead and tell me why I'm dead wrong, Rich. Go ahead.
No, not dead wrong, man. But I do like the Motta side, and I think minus 130 is nice. I don't think that Ogden has the hands to trouble Motta. Motta can be overly aggressive and it gets him in trouble. But he doesn't have any KO wins, Ogden, and I see him as a jiu-jitsu guy, albeit he doesn't really push that in his fights. I think he's going to get cut after this fight as well. It's the last fight on his contract. He's 34 years old, hasn't really done anything special in the UFC. So I think he's on his way out. He's a coach at his own gym as well, I believe. He's been on vacation recently, bought a house.
He coached your boy Mike Breeden to success against Jubilee. Yeah,
that's true. But yeah, Instagram, man, that's all he seems to be doing. He's got like outside stuff going on. I think this is probably just one final paycheck. Motta does have his problems, but I think he's likely to get the KO here. What was noticeable from doing the research, though, he's got 6 losses, Motta, and they're all by finish, 4 KOs, 2 subs, which obviously isn't good. But when you look at him, like you were saying, Jim Miller in your debut in the UFC is harsh as fuck, man. And we all know Jim Miller. He's solid early. He's got the most record for subs or whatever in the UFC, whatever it might be. Torres, he's a big fucker for the division on all the Mexican supplements. That's a tough fight. And before that, in the regional scene, you know, he fought Rob Hale. That's a tough fight. And the Franca fight where he got subbed, he was fucking him up in round 1, man. So there's no shame there. I've always liked Franca. He's a good jiu-jitsu guy. Well, he was back in the day anyway. He got some good wins. But I think he's going to be too aggressive, Motta, for Ogden. And he's probably going to get a finish in round 1. That's my official prediction. I went and watched the Levitt fight against Ogden, man, and it was just disgusting. I think I bet Ogden in that fight, and I just couldn't believe the IQ and what I was seeing, man, over the 3 rounds. So I can never back a guy like that. I think this is a setup for Motta, to be honest. And yeah, I'm in on it, man.
Yeah, Ogden's a weird guy to cap, just doesn't always go out there and put on very entertaining fights, kind of leaves it to the discretion of the judges at times, my 15 leg kicks or your 4 jabs, just tries to shut down a fight. And so, that again is something that I don't like to fade necessarily, that Weasley type of archetype, but I do think that this should be a winnable fight for Motta. So good scrap. I haven't even looked at the prop market on the fight. So I'll take a look at that and see if anything stands out. But for now, probably just content to move on to the main card here. And as we do that, guys, just want to ask some quick housekeeping notes here. Please go ahead and drop a like on the video as we get started on the main card. Helps other people find the show and really appreciate that. And if you're enjoying, make sure you get subscribed because we talk about the fights here each and every week. So without further ado, let's start with this main card. And Rich, we've got a UFC debutant. I am normally a guy who prides myself on my pronunciations, my ability to get some names. You'll hear a Craig out of me later to just try and feel like I'm one of the guys, right? But Miktabek Oralbai. I tried my best, and I'm going to have to go back to the workshop on that one. But in any case, he's taking on Uros Medic. So 2 fun names here. But somebody's got to win, right? It's a welterweight matchup. Obviously, we got a short notice debutant here in Miktabek Oralbai, but he did compete somewhat recently, so probably just stacking one camp on top of another, so to speak. Normally, if you get back in the gym within a week, something like that, week and a half, your cardio shouldn't take a huge dip. So I'm sure he's going to be relatively prepared for this contest. I did have a chance to do some tape on this guy. I wanted to make sure that was like my number 1 rule for this week. I was like, let me familiarize myself with this guy because he's new here. Talulian, I know his game like the back of my hand, right? I don't need to do that much more tape to get familiar. But Oralbai, I was like, I've never seen this guy fight. A lot of his competition is kind of hard to evaluate. He's not fighting very good guys, but what did it look like he had? It looked like he's got multivariate skills. He can fight on the feet. He can fight on the ground. He can pass. He can get takedowns. He can attempt submissions. So I liked a lot of what I saw from the guy. He could push a 15-minute pace as well. I saw the fight. Let me pull up his record here because I don't want to speak out of turn. The Jalen Fuller fight, he just absolutely dominated with his wrestling and grappling for the most part. And he attempted a lot of subs, didn't get him, but just stayed persistent, attacked with ground and pound, used a lot of his opportunities on top. And then when he wasn't on top, stayed safe, kept the distance. He does some things that I don't like on the feet, Rich, which is like he is oftentimes up, down, forward, back, but he's not side to side ever. He's kind of just very like this. But what he does do is he uses kind of like a Sean Strickland, that backhand to push everything away that's coming at him. So instead of getting offline, he just pushes things offline, if you know what I mean. That's going to work most of the time, but Uros Medic is also like a big, long guy. He's going to be able to hit you from pretty far away. He's got long, straight punches. He showed in his last fight. He's got power too. And he's not a quitter. Last time out, he got dropped early on. He was getting pressured really bad by Semmelsberger. Semmelsberger backs him up to the cage, hitting him hard. He tries to get off the cage. He gets dropped. Then he's like on his back, taking some shots, but he just stayed composed there. And then he was starting to land on Semmelsberger by the end of that first round. It reminded me of like Gaffarov and Anheliger, right? How the tables turned, right, in the course of that one round. And then by round 3, that spinning back fist, I don't know if he's getting enough talk about a KO of the year. That's an incredible knockout, man. And I'm not normally a spinning back fist guy, because normally they're thrown at an inopportune time, or it's a guy who does it twice in a row to land it, right? Something just completely ridiculous. It was beautiful. He caught him with a big punch, and as the guy tried to exit, he just spun, caught him again. It was beautiful timing. So Uros Medic seems like a dangerous guy on the feet, but I just think he's going to be on his back this whole fight. I haven't seen this guy really tested in the wrestling and the grappling, but one of the easiest scores I ever made, Rich, was betting Jalen Turner by submission. Jalen Turner by sub in round 1. Fight not to go the distance. Fight ends in round 1. Fight ends by, any bet you could think of, I had it on that fight because I was so sure that, or actually, I think I had sub 2 and 3. But in any case, I just was very sure that Uros Medic was not going to want any part of Jalen Turner on the mat in that fight. And I think that the same is true here. That last time out against Semmelsberger had great positions. he's not able to capitalize, right? He's not able to put together the jiu-jitsu to punish somebody for those mistakes. He's got big power. He's got 10 knockdowns in like 7 UFC fights. The guy's got ridiculous knockdown rate, but the jiu-jitsu is just not there. I feel like in this case, the jiu-jitsu probably is there. You know, it hasn't shown in some of his recent fights, but you go back and look, he said on commentary, like you listen to the comms for the fight, they're like, yeah, he said he's going to come out here and strike. And he like half-heartedly attempted one takedown to keep the guy guessing, but he just went out there with a pure intention to knock the guy out on the feet and then knock the guy out on the feet. It was against a guy who he should beat, but again, he's just showing I have skills everywhere. I can fight on the feet. That's no problem. I think in this fight, it's short notice. None of that, brother. Take the fight to the ground. Get on top of him. I think he's going to dominate him on the mat. So give me the newcomer here, Oral Bai, and I'll learn to pronounce his name, especially if he wins. What do you think about this one, Rich?
Yeah, I give up trying to pronounce his name, to be honest. I'm calling him Ong Bak now, if anyone knows who that is. Yeah, I like him, man. I think he's going to get the win. Somebody pointed out on Twitter that Medic has an 80% takedown defense. But then I pointed out it's the guys he's been fighting, man. When you're fighting Omar Morales, who isn't a guy who pushes wrestling, or Semelsberger, really, he doesn't really push the wrestling. He likes to stand and strike, usually. And Alan Cruz only tried a takedown once he was fucking rocked on the feet. So it's easy to have an 80% takedown defense in the UFC, given the sample size. I think he'd be smart to obviously push the wrestling in this fight. I have seen him do it, obviously, regionally. I went and watched all his regional footage. Some fights he was content to stand and didn't push the wrestling at all. But he is from Team Alpha Male with Uriah Faber, Mike Brown. No, Mike Brown's ATT. Uriah Faber. I think they're going to have a good game plan for him. And I think if he pushes the wrestling, this is a wrap. I think he gets a finish. Glenn pointed it out in the chat. I think he gets a submission. Obviously, he didn't get one on Fulham on the regional tape. But Medic is really poor, man. I think Medic's a white belt on the ground from what I'm seeing. I went back and watched some of Medic's regional tape. When he was put on his back, you know, he was getting discouraged. He was kind of just trying to keep guard and survive the round. He didn't want to rush to get to his feet and give up the neck or anything. So yeah, I really like this guy, man. And if you go and check out his record, he should be undefeated. The one loss he's got in on the regionals, let me just go and have a look at that one because I forgot who it was.
Khalid Setoyev.
Yeah, he won that fight in my opinion, man. He should have got the decision. Even the other guy couldn't believe it when they raised his hand. So he's an undefeated fighter in my opinion. So yeah, I like him, man. I just hope he pushes the wrestling. I think on the feet, Medic is probably better, more athletic. He is a kickboxer. I was going to pick Medic to beat Parsons by decision. Obviously, that fight's got scrapped, whatever. But yeah, I like this new guy, man, and hopefully he gets the sub. And hopefully they open the sub line up something stupid. 800, that'd be nice. But yeah, 300 or more, and I'll probably take a shot on the sub, man.
Yeah, I tend to agree. You know, and even the ITD, I feel like could be somewhat interesting because I don't know that he can, you know, knock out Medic standing. I don't really think he can, but I think he could definitely TKO Medic on the ground because I have seen him just like elevate, slam, takedown, pass the side control. And when you get to those dominant positions, you can just start effing somebody up really bad. And I just feel like, especially if you're not used to being in those wrestling and grappling scenarios, you can get really tired. So I definitely agree with Matt. Medic's wrestling has improved over the years, but like that's like starting from scratch and then going out there and like, you know, getting better. Yeah, getting better compared to what? You know, did he get better that he's better than this guy? That I'm not quite sold on. So shout out to Gobbler who pointed out the Urubai. I think that that's a great pronunciation. So we'll stick with that from now on. Urubai for the win. That's what I'm expecting here. In the first fight on the main card, if I can get my Tapology to load, Tapology just blipped me out for a second. We can move on to the next fight here, which is a women's strawweight bout between Amanda Ribas taking on Luana Pinheiro. And this is an interesting matchup, Rich, because last time out, I said that I was really excited about Amanda Ribas moving back down to 115 in the future because I just did not think it was going to go well for her against Maycee Barber at 125. And she was outperforming my expectations in the first round. But the physicality of Maycee Barber, she's just a slow starter. You know, oftentimes Maycee Barber goes out there, starts getting beat up a little bit in round 1, and then just turns it on. And by round 2, she really starts to beat people up and gets finishes at times. She was able to do that. I forget who that was that she really beat up in the second round. I think it was JJ Aldrich after, really tough first round, kind of like an Erin Blanchfield, right? It's tough first round with JJ, but then you start to really bring that pressure on her. She breaks in that second round. So I'm looking at this fight and I'm saying to myself, Amanda Ribas has a clear, glaring flaw in her game. She does not have a great chin. She's been finished a number of times via TKO, which in women's MMA, not very common, right? She's 2-3 in her career to the knockout prop. However, she is 4-0 to the submission, and that includes wins over Viviane Araújo, Katlyn Chookagian on my scorecard, Verna Jandiroba, who is, again, a very world-class Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner, Mackenzie Dern. Granted, it was back in the day, but she beat Mackenzie Dern on the mat. Don't let people forget that, right? Nobody talks about that ever to this day. She took her down when she wanted to, and she was able to survive on the mat, no problem, from the guard, because she has really, really good jiu-jitsu. The problem for her has never been the wrestling. It's never been the jiu-jitsu. It's been her ability to win fights optically in terms of the judges, because she gets hit. She does not react great to getting hit. She's kind of like a bobblehead, right? She goes and just like bobbles around when she gets hit. She also wears damage poorly. So for those reasons, she struggles at times to distance herself from opponents when the fight's on the feet at all. So for me, that means I have to look at the dog or pass in this situation. I'm a big Amanda Ribas fan, but even still, I look at this fight and I say Luana Pinheiro is probably and potentially fraudulent, but I don't know it for sure yet. And she does look big and physical, like she can hit hard, and she's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I'm like, I think Amanda, clearly the better Jiu-Jitsu practitioner here. But we saw against Marina Rodriguez, like Marina is not good on the ground. She got taken down. She got beat up in that fight. And then she survived to round 2. And then Amanda's out there in round 2, just like bobbing and weaving. Like, what are we doing? You just saw the game plan. You had it. And you're just like out here trading blows now. It's not like she's learned from this and like changed her game completely. She's out there boxing with Katlyn Chookagian for 2.5 minutes of each round. Like, she was easily getting takedowns, getting to dominant top positions. What'd she do with them? Jack shit. Cost me a lot of fucking money. I'll tell you the truth. So I think that Amanda Ribas probably deserved the win there. But again, that's against a girl who's very not dangerous in Katlyn Chookagian, who's just a point striker for the most part on the feet. And I'm just feeling like, Amanda, good fighter, but now cutting back to 115. Why'd she leave the weight class? It's a hard cut for her. It's a big deal. She gets knocked out at this weight sometimes because she can't take a clean shot here. At 125, the problem wasn't that she couldn't take a clean shot. It's the physicality. She's a tweener. If there's a 120, she's the champion, right? There isn't. 115, she cuts a lot of weight. It's hard for her to maintain. Let's see if she could do it. But there's a reason she went up to 125. She took some short notice fights. She tried to become a contender real quick. I thought that she was going to do it, but it wasn't meant to be. So now she's back at 115. She's older now. She left the weight class when she was younger, fresher. Now she just took a big knockout loss. It wasn't that long ago. And she's back in the cage. It's just a couple of red flags for me. So I like Amanda as a fighter. I think she should be favored to win this fight. But when you're talking about 65 and 70% confidence intervals against a girl who we know will lie, cheat, and steal to win, right? If she can get the DQ, she's out of here, dude. She'll take that. No problem. On top of that, like, it's WMMA. Sometimes it just plays out closer than we expect. Okay, then it's a girl that has maybe one of the worst records of a chin in women's MMA history. Am I exaggerating? Like, for a good high-level fighter, like Mackenzie Dern just had a similar chin performance. I think that's the first time of her career, and it was against Jessica Andrade, not Polyana Viana. So these are some real red flags for me, but I do think Ribas, better on the ground, should have a path to a sub or a decision here, maybe even a TKO from a top position. So I get she's got more paths, but for me, it just feels like a fight that the margins are a little bit closer here. Rich, give us your thoughts, brother.
Yeah, it's funny what you say, man. I had the same thing in my notes. At 125, she struggles with the physicality. When she drops to 115, I think the depletion, cutting the weight, gives her problems with her chin. Yeah, it's always a concern, man, back in Ribas, especially at this price at 115. And then you look on the other side at this Luana chick, man. She sits down on her punches and throws heat. It might not be technical or pretty or It's typical women's MMA shit, but she throws some heat, man, and she's got power in her hands. It only takes one of them to connect, to either put her lights out or to change the course of the fight. So I don't think you can be laying this much chalk on Ribas. I do like the submission for Ribas. It's plus 400, or at least it was last time I looked. I think that Luana is a fake black belt, to be honest. She was a purple belt in 2020, and then all of a sudden in 2023, 2 years later, she's a black belt. She trains with a boyfriend, Nikolas. I think she probably got a black belt from him or somebody he knows, you know, got advanced, you know, fast tracked. I don't think she's a legit black belt. If it was a pure BJJ match, she'd get subbed 9 times out of 10 by Ribas. So I hope we get to see this go to the ground, and we see them roll around for a little bit. They're both judokas, so they've got some good trips. Every time I watch a Ribas fight, she's taking people to the ground, even when it's up at 125. You know, like you were saying, she took Jeka down, Rodriguez for a minute or so. But I think Ribas is a girl that the UFC want to push, man. And I hate saying that because it's a bit cringe sometimes, but she has a huge following, man. 2.5 million on Instagram. She's a very popular girl
by far.
Yeah, even in the whole of the UFC, like that's massive. 2.5 million. I remember Derek Lewis, looking at him back on the card the other day. He was just over 1 million, something like that. I've been waiting to fade Luana for a while, man. I think she's a major fraud. I faded her against Marcos when she pulled that stunt and you know, got that DQ win from the by doing the acting job. So I've been waiting to fade her, man. I think I'm going to do it with Ribas by submission. Yeah, I've also seen Luana. She slows down a little bit. You know, she likes her calf kicks, throws some fucking spam punches, likes to keep it on the feet. But after a round, man, you know, she's blowing a little bit. Her cardio isn't completely there, I don't think. And this is definitely her biggest step up in competition. I know she fought Waterson, but Waterson's getting on a little bit now. And even Waterson, that was a split decision. So I like Ribas, I guess, but I can't play the chalk, man. I'll just take a small shot on the submission, I think. Plus 400.
Yeah, dude, even just looking at the pictures of this girl online, I would feel not very comfortable with minus 240 on Amanda Ribas. I do think she should win this fight. But again, it's a game of margins, right? And when has Amanda struggled? It's oftentimes the places where people are most bullish, right? Marina Rodriguez, she's minus 350. It's like everybody was sure she's going to take her down and easily dominate her. But then she just does an Amanda thing. You know, she was winning that fight. She was making it look easy and did an Amanda thing. So I'm hoping that she's corrected those mistakes. I am excited to see her back at 115. Think it's a better weight class for her, but I just want to see her make this weight, you know, feel okay and perform here because, you know, it's been a little while. But next up, we can move to the talk of the town, Payton Talbott. Is he deserving of a minus 1,000 favorite against Nick Aguirre? Rich, what's your verdict?
He definitely isn't deserving of the price tag. I know that much. Yeah, maybe he wins, but round one's going to be a bit fucking, you know, sweaty, man. If you've got a bet on that minus 600, this kid, fucking, what's his name? Aguirre. He is a pretty good jiu-jitsu guy. He has only shown it regionally though, so who knows if that's going to transition. But who's Talbott, man? He's a regional kid himself. It's not like Aguirre's fighting some vet here, some like Jim Miller type in his debut. So yeah, I think you got to be careful playing Talbott at this number. In fact, I'd just say you shouldn't be betting him at this number. I think it's stupid if you are. You might as well just take a shot on his KO at round 2 or 3. That's how it usually goes for him. He's very hittable on the feet, but he doesn't have to worry about that here with Aguirre. I do see Aguirre as just a jiu-jitsu guy, but he's very live to get that in round 1, man. I don't think the short notice fight against drawing a blank, man. Dan Argueta is a true reflection of his skills. I think he's better than that. So on a full camp, I think Aguirre has got a chance in round 1 to get the submission. But if it doesn't go that way, he is likely to get TKO'd in round 2 or 3. This guy Talbott, he does have a solid chin. He is young. He is a finisher notoriously. I know he finished it by decision in his Dana White Contender Series fight, but ordinarily he's a finisher, man. And he puts on the pace a little bit. He just fuck about in there a little bit. He tries showboating. I see him do a rolling thunder. in one of his fights. And another thing that concerns me with Talbott is I don't know how serious he is about fighting. You know, when you watch his interviews, he's always talking about other shit. He's one of these arty guys talking about outside endeavors. And, you know, I just don't think MMA is the forefront of him, you know, for a career. So that concerns me, man. His attitude towards fighting. I don't know how much he's been training. I see he was at some Running Man event, whatever the fuck that is, with his girlfriend. So yeah, basically, if you're going to play this one, Aguirre, you might as well bet the sub, because if he doesn't hit the sub, he's likely to get knocked out if you want to take the dog opportunity. But I think most times Talbott's going to knock this guy out in round 2 or 3, man. Just an accumulation of strikes, heavy pace, the cardio of Talbott. He's got an unlimited gas tank. So yeah, I like the late props, man. They're probably shit numbers though. I'll have a look while you're saying your bit, man.
Yeah, this is interesting, man, because I feel like neither one of these guys just like looks like a lights out athlete. You know, I think Payton Talbott looks like a better athlete than Nick Aguirre, and I do think that that definitely contributes to the line here. But I also think that Aguirre looks like he's put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of energy. You know, he's put in a lot of work on the grappling mats, no doubt about that. Could potentially be a place of advantage. We haven't seen Talbott tested very much on the mat. Dan Argueta, tough guy, tough style matchup. You know, what's one thing? It's like rock, paper, scissors, right? What's one thing that typically beats jiu-jitsu? Really, really good wrestling. You know, just dogged wrestling. If you're tough, if you're not going to get caught in bad positions, you could dominate where somebody is, especially in position against the cage, stuff like that. I feel like Dan Argueta is a tough style matchup for him. You know, in this fight, who's going to get the best of the wrestling and the grappling? I think that's an open question. You know, I do think that Aguirre, that's his path in all likelihood, is to get it to the ground. You look at his record, 4 wins by submission, 3 wins by TKO, but those are all coming on the mat as well. So he's a guy that just likes to get it to the mat and try and beat people up down there. You know, Payton Talbott definitely has a lot of talent. He's got a lot of raw skill. I think that he's like a natural showman, you know, a natural finisher of sorts as well. Last time out didn't materialize, but you know, I really feel like Reyes Cortez put a lot into that fight, into that camp. You know, kind of just gave everything he had out there. And I didn't think he was going to win, but I also felt like he was probably going to break it down the stretch. And he did a good job just staying in within himself and keeping in, trying to win the fight, but he just did not have enough to do it. And I feel like the same is probably going to be true of Aguirre here. I think he's going to come out and try and get takedowns. You know, he's trained with good guys, Valley Flow Striking Academy, Bilal Muhammad, Yair Rodriguez, and those guys. Most recently, posting pictures with Saeed Yakub Kakramanov, Sergio Pettis. Again, good fighters. He's getting in the work. He said, you want to be a savage? Surround yourself with savages. I bet he's working on that wrestling and grappling. He's a fan of wrestling for sure. You know, I saw him posting up pictures at the Iowa Hawkeyes wrestling matches as well. So I think that he's going to know the game plan here, right? I don't think he's going to come out here and be like, let me test my striking like a lot of these guys do. So when I'm backing an underdog, that is something I want to see. I do think that the line is a little bit out of proportion here, but I also agree. Talbott late props make some sense. Talbott by sub, ends by sub, Aguirre by sub, I think are all interesting spots here. Why do I say Talbott sub? Aguirre's going to be shooting takedown after takedown. Talbott's got long ass long ass limbs. Aguirre's got a long ass neck. He's not that physical. I think he could get sprawled into a front headlock situation here. Talbott does have submissions on his record. Shout out to my guy Jewish Better. He sent that number to me. And it is something I constantly look for. Somebody's a minus 1,000 favorite, but they're over 10-1 to win by a certain method. It just doesn't make much mathematical sense. And then on top of that, the ends by sub is probably going to be a great price, right? If Talbot sub is 14 and Aguirre sub is 13, it's like you're probably going to be looking at a very high price in a fight where one guy is like expressly going to be trying to grapple the whole time. And that could lead to a submission for either guy. So for me, those are a couple of interesting ways to look at this fight where you can get some plus money and hope for, you know, an outcome that fades the public narrative. But I think that Talbot late round props do make some sense to be.
Yeah. Please, they're not even playable, bro. They're fucking 325 and 550 for rounds 2 and 3. So I don't like their numbers at all.
Specific methods for rounds 2 and 3 would be where I'd have to go then. And I think that that's an interesting way to play it, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see. So in any case, we can move on to a more closely lined fight between Jordan Levitt and Chase Hooper, and it's only getting more closely lined by the day. A lot of money coming in on the Monkey King, Jordan Levitt. And I think that when you're looking at a fun matchup on paper, one thing I noted in my first look this week, Rich, you got two personalities here, two guys that actually, make fights more interesting, I feel like, as opposed to, generic fighter A versus generic fighter B. It's like these two guys have personalities. You could root for them. You could root against them, whatever you so choose. And I feel like Chase Hooper, for me, easy guy to get behind. Young kid comes into the UFC. He's got a lot of heart. He's got a lot of courage. Doesn't always go his way, but he always gives you everything that he has. He always goes out there to throw, to fight, and to get takedowns, to try and implement his game. And when the fight's not going his way, he'll continue to look for his opportunity until that third round, unless you put his lights out. And my hat is off to Steve Garcia, right? I did not see that one coming at all. I'll tell you the truth. But I also feel like Steve Garcia, in hindsight, kind of a tough style matchup for him. Chase probably going to struggle to get him to the mat. And if he doesn't get him to the mat, it's going to be, a tough time on the feet. Jordan Levitt's a guy that can strike, right? I don't want to take anything away from him, but it's not his bread and butter. When he's won striking matchups on the feet, you mentioned the Trey Ogden fight. He threw a bunch of low kicks, danced around a little bit, kept his distance. Hats off to him. It was a smart performance, right? He got the win, but it didn't blow your hair back. It didn't make you think, wow, Jordan Levitt, his striking's really come a long way. He got the knockout last time. That was cool. He's got some power in his kicks. He touted the fact he's like, I don't get knocked down. I knock people down in my fights. Hey, again, hats off to him. I think that that's probably true. I don't expect Chase Hooper to knock him down on the feet, most likely in this fight. But I also think that the ABCs say always bet on cardio. And I do think that the cardio dynamic favors Chase here pretty significantly based on what we've seen from the wrestling and the grappling historically. I do think if the fight plays out just on the feet, it's going to be really dicey at Chase Hooper minus 200, even if he's improved on the feet, even if he's getting better. Just because Jordan Levitt is not an easy guy to take out on the feet. He's made a career for himself by that being the case. But Paddy Pimblett was able to outlast him and then eventually submit him on the ground, right? Just take him to a deeper place in the fight, make him work a little bit, make him scramble. He eventually gave up in that fight. I feel like that's exactly what would happen here. Chase Hooper might have some dicey moments, might have to really compete hard early, but I just think he's got more to give over the course of 15 minutes in terms of the pace, in terms of the cardio, in terms of even potentially the durability. That is yet to be seen, but I just feel like we haven't seen much in terms of testing of Jordan Levitt, and I think that if he's in bad positions on bottom, Chase Hooper can be a menace with the ground and pound. You had mentioned in your breakdown this week, so I'll let you have the say on it, but there's some things about the dynamic of this fight, maybe some training stuff, but when I just look at it, like, on the historical tape, the reason I bet Chase Hooper against Kolaris by KO was because Chase Hooper on the regional scene beats the tar out of people, like absolutely works them from top position with ground and pound because the submissions weren't always there. And these are two guys that are competent on the mat. Both of them know jiu-jitsu, but I do worry that Jordan Levitt would just give up a bad position if things were going really dire for him, because I think he's a smart guy. And sometimes smart guys think, hey, I'm going to live to fight another day. I don't need this shit anymore. And he's got a kid on the way. He's got a bunch of other things going on in his life. So I just feel like you could see a potential underperformance from Levitt here. Some distractions, some would say, but let's wait and see. How do you feel about this fight, Rich?
Yeah, if anyone is betting Levitt, I'd be interested to know why, man. And that's not even having a dig. I am genuinely interested in why someone would bet Levitt here, because whether you like the price tag on Hooper or not, I do think he wins this fight and should win it pretty easily, to be honest. Probably gets a finish along the way as well, like you were saying. It's like a war of attrition, man. Hooper, he's got the cardio. He's notorious for that. And on the Levitt side, man, he gasses out in fights quite badly as well, especially the Paddy fight. He was done after a round when there was heavy grappling involved against the cage in round one. And we know from Hooper, man, that's what he's going to do. He's going to spam some punches, not the most technical, no power on the punches, but he's got a half decent chin, minus the Stevie Garcia KO. And he's going to close the distance. He's going to initiate the grappling. He's happy to roll around, throw some short punches, mix it up in there. And he's going to wear you down, man. And I don't see how Levitt's going to be able to handle that. So after a round, in my opinion, Levitt's going to be done. He's going to be cooked. And it's whether Chase puts in a submission or finishes him from mount like he did to Kolaris. I just don't think Levitt can keep up, man. He's got no hands to fend him off on the feet. You need some power to make Chase respect you. And even if you have power, we've seen with Chase, he doesn't respect it like Garcia. He just walks straight into the fire, man. He has some leg kicks, Levitt. That's usually his game. He likes to gauge his distance and fend you off with leg kicks. But Hooper's just going to walk straight through him, man, and close the distance. They're going to get into a clinch, roll around. I don't think Levitt's jiu-jitsu is as good as Chase's. I think Chase has got better jiu-jitsu. I don't think there's a chance of Levitt submitting him, to be honest. So yeah, everything's on Hooper's side for me. I think he smashes in this spot. He has failed in some pay-per-views in his career, but when he's at the apex and he hasn't got that pressure on his shoulders, he usually does pretty well. I think he's only lost one fight at the apex, Hooper. So I like him, man. The UFC like him. He does some work for him behind the scenes. I think this is a layup spot for him. He's filling out as well at 155. I've seen some pictures with him training with Chiesa, Wonderboy, and he's the same size as him. Not obviously, he's not as thick, but he's a big guy, man, or a big kid. I've been putting out that there's a rumor that he KO'd Wonderboy in practice. I'm just doing an aerial Hawani. Apparently now you can just make up your own fucking rumors, and hopefully they come true. So that was a bit of fun on Twitter. But yeah, I like Hooper, man. I think he gets it done, and I think it'd be a submission over the TKO. Submission was 400, so I like that look, man.
I hear where you're coming from, man. And again, if there's a friendly dynamic, that could definitely lead to that sort of outcome. The one other thing that I wanted to note here, Jordan Levitt is from Vegas, and I don't know if this guy has ever been a male stripper, but I want to find out, because I'll tell you, he's got the attitude that he could have been. And I do have a rule about not fading strippers in Las Vegas, because Vegas-based strippers get the decision. So Chase Hooper's got to go out there and finish. Otherwise, he might get the old Las Vegas screw job. Ask Vanessa Demopoulos. But I do think that in all likelihood, Chase should get the nod here. But that was the last thing I wanted to mention before we moved off this fight. You got any closing thoughts here, Rich?
Yeah, just in what world, man, do you think like Levitt could win this fight? Like, would it be a KO, a submission, decision?
I think that, number one, I think any fighter in the UFC is live to KO Chase Hooper, just because of what we've seen so far. Steve Garcia, I wouldn't say is like set himself apart as a great striker and this and that. He got absolutely flattened by who was that? Nerdenbecky, right? So I definitely think of Steve as a guy who's a better striker and a more aggressive striker than Levitt. But I just mean, like, I wasn't expecting that outcome at all. And I saw it, and it was so quick and rapid and violent that I was like, okay, that could happen against anybody. But I also just think, unless it's a front kick to the face or something, I don't see him generating the power with the hands that a lot of those guys have. So to your point, the hands probably not there, but he does have a weird kicking game, kind of hard to read. And if you're Chase Hooper getting caught taking pictures a little bit, he's still a young enough kid. He could still make mistakes. So those are the kind of things that I would worry about. But yeah, overall, I do think that Chase is just better equipped to win this fight. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit longer, probably favor him in the wrestling. I think that he's also a guy that probably has better cardio here for 15 minutes. So it's not really that I have so much confidence in Hooper. It's just like, I think that this is a favorable stylistic matchup for him. That's all. So could be wrong. Been wrong many times, be wrong many times again. But the other thing I'll mention is I haven't bet Chase in this spot. The only 3 times I ever bet Chase was as an underdog, but I've cashed 2 of those 3 times. He's been underrated several times by the market, and his KO lines went from plus 1,400 to like plus 450. So I just think that maybe some of the market value is gone, but I still think he's probably going to win the fight. Next up, we've got Jake Matthews taking on Michael Morales in the co-main event. And Rich, why don't you start us off with this one? Because I believe you got another hole burning in your chest with this take.
Yeah, people are going to fucking moan about this one as well. I like Matthews. I don't like Morales in this spot. So I think Morales is a white belt. He does have a bit of wrestling. He's an Ecuadorian wrestling champ, apparently. From tape, he's got some body lock takedowns, but I haven't seen him, hit any blast doubles, go for single legs, chain wrestle, run the pipes. It all has been body lock takedowns. So I'm not too convinced on his wrestling. He is a solid athlete. I'll give him that. He does have a chin. I'll give him that. He's got power in his hands. But, it's welterweight. Everyone's got a bit of power, man. Matthews, I know he's a bit hit or miss. You know, he has some performances like the one against Samuelsberger, and then he goes out and KOs Fiallo when Fiallo's on the up and was KOing everybody. No one give Matthews a chance in that fight. I like his hands, Matthews, man. They've improved. I've been capping him since he was fucking 21, man, when he was just a young wrestler with some jiu-jitsu. He's definitely come a long way. He's a vet. And yeah, he's, like I was saying, his hands have impressed me, man, in his head movement. His feet as well, the way he moves around the cage, that's impressive. Obviously, he can get caught in this fight, but it's similar to the... I'm making comparisons to the Bonfim and Dalby fight, you know, where you've got a veteran and you've got this young kid on the come up, and yeah, this is his toughest fight to date, in my opinion, for Morales. I know he fought Max Griffin, but Max Griffin, I don't think he's got the offensive threat that Jake Matthews has. Jake Matthews is a black belt in jiu-jitsu and a legit one at that. If it goes to the ground and Jake can even get on top of him, I think Jake could get the submission. It was plus 1,000. I think that's a crazy price. But even the hands, man, we've seen it with Matthews. He likes to put his back to the cage. He shows good head movement. And Morales gets a bit reckless, man, trying to take people's head off. I think he can definitely be countered. His left hand's a bit low as well, I've noticed from the tape. So yeah, hopefully Jake can catch him, man. But I won't be laying the chalk on Morales in this situation. Like I said, it's his toughest fight to date. And yeah, hopefully Matthews gets it done. The number's a bit stupid as well, plus 270 now. I think that's a bit wild as well, a bit disrespectful. Yeah, I like Matthews, man.
Yeah, I was doing some tape on this on the Morales side. I actually have to do tape on the Matthews side before I'd feel comfortable, parting with any money here. And I agree with you on some point that I do think that Morales is talented. You know, I do think he's got a good build for the division. He is a big, long guy, but there's a couple things that I didn't love as well. You know, number one, there's a few times in the Fugit fight where he like takes a big, deep breath, kind of like wrings out his arms, like just resets himself, and just was leaving himself in range at a few times when he did that. And Fugit was touching him with the left hook. You know, he was landing a couple good shots. He hit an inside trip takedown as well. And then the commentary noted, like, he just rushed. Like, he was like, I got this takedown, tries to hop over, past the guard, lets him right back up to his feet. Pretty foolish, wasted his opportunity there. And so then they get back up to the feet. They're competing, they're scrapping. There's a good back and forth fight. And I don't know if that fight was on short notice or what exactly happened there, but Fugit just slowed down really, really bad. Like, just out of nowhere in the second round, it looked like maybe it was a big shot that connected, changed the complexion of the fight, but something happened where Fugit just didn't look like himself anymore and started getting hit really clean, started backing up. But for a lot of that fight, he had Morales backing up, you know, just like moving him around the cage, coming forward, pressuring. He was eating some shots to do it. But Morales was willing to take a lot of steps backwards. He was putting himself on the fence and then trying to get off the fence is when he ended up giving up that inside trip as well. So I just think that he does, some things right, but he's still a young guy. He's still putting it all together. And I feel like Fugit kind of let that fight go, kind of let that fight get out of hand, where at the end of round one, it was looking like it was going to be anybody's round, and then he gets hit cleanly and drops the round. Like there was just a couple really critical errors there from Fugit, but it didn't make it seem like, Morales is just head and shoulders above the division. Trevin Giles had some success with his striking, was landing with his jab. He just doesn't really have the chin necessarily to hold up at this end, the durability. I believe that was a first time cutting down to welterweight for him. But if I'm wrong, it was one of the first or second times. He hadn't done much of it. He was a middleweight. And I think that compromised his chin. I don't think he was able to take clean strikes as well. So when I look at this fight, I say to myself, Jake Matthews is a guy I've never bet on before, right? I faded one time at chalk Jake Matthews, which is with Sean Brady. He was minus 200. I bet 3.5 units. Sean Brady is like a way more proven wrestler and grappler archetype than Michael Morales. And he was able to out-wrestle and out-grapple Jake Matthews. And I think that in this fight, my questions are as follows. Can Jake Matthews take down Michael Morales? Because Fugit was able to do so. I think it's possible, but I want to see what his wrestling looks like on tape. I just can't remember many examples of him pushing the wrestling. And the other thing I want to note is, like, how has his striking looked in his recent fights? when he's going against bigger guys. And I want to see what examples there are of Matthews fighting guys with a longer reach than him, because that's what he's got to deal with here. A lot of Matthews' attack is boxing, and I have seen a lot of clean boxing attacks from Fugit land on Morales, but I also saw a lot of attacks, with the kicks, to the body as well. Fugit was just trying to target him with a lot of body work, and I thought it was really successful. I had it in my notes that that's a way to get to Morales, is to work him to the body. So those are the things I want to see on tape from Jake Matthews if I'm going to get to a play. I do think that Morales is not somebody I could back at -300 based on what I know about him right now. He's got good physical attributes. He's got a lot of positives, but I also just think he goes from being a big underdog on Contender Series to a few fights into his UFC run. He's 15-0. He's never had that fraud check, that defeat, but he's had a couple dicey moments along the way. It hasn't all been smooth sailing. He's given up minutes and positions against guys that are not very experienced, right? Not very proven at this level. Adam Fugit is a newcomer, right? And he probably has already been cut from the organization, no disrespect, but he kind of came in, had his whole career, and then it was all over before it started. This guy, Jake Matthews, for whatever reason, has been kept around all this time. They've seasoned him for a long time, and I think he's kind of a gatekeeper. But he goes out there against Semmelsberger. He got chin checked early, and he never quit. He stayed in the fight for the full 15 minutes. I thought that was an improvement from some things that we've seen from Jake Matthews in the past as well. Maybe a step in the right direction. But it just seems to me like this is going to be a fight where we're going to see Morales tested again, and he probably ends up finding the chin of Jake Matthews or something like that along the way. But if he doesn't, I think it's going to be a really dicey fight. I think that if you're playing Morales KO at +140, you should absolutely cash that out and take the ends KO at even money. Why would you not buy down for 40 cents and give yourself all this additional equity when we're talking about somebody in Jake Matthews who can record knockdowns, who knocked out Andre Fiallo in vicious fashion? I know Fiallo doesn't have a great chin, but he knocked him out very early. And we've seen Morales take clean punches in almost every fight. It's not like the guy is just out there protecting his chin at all times. He's getting hit cleanly a lot of the time. So I do think I'm not saying that Semi is more proven than Morales. I'm saying that Semi, what does he do well? He hits hard. He's recorded 10 knockdowns in the UFC in 7 fights. The guy hits very hard. That's his claim to fame. Even Uros Medic, who knocked him out in the 3rd round, suffered a knockdown in round 1 against Matthew Semmelsberger. So I think of Jake Matthews getting beat up in that fight is not a great look. But also, Semmelsberger is a big guy. He's an awkward guy. He's hard to wrestle, and he hurt him early. How does that fight play out if he doesn't hurt him early? I'm not sure. So it's a really fun fight. It's a good scrap, and I think it's a good test. I think it's an appropriate test for Morales. But at 15-0, we've seen other guys in this position look really good, and then they stumble when they go against that more seasoned vet. And somebody said he lost to Semi stinks. Nicholas Dalby lost to freaking Jesse Ronson. Jesse Ronson couldn't ever hack it in the UFC. So styles make fights. It's not all about who they fought in the past. So I think that it's a reasonable argument. And again, be wrong many times again. But I do think it's a dog or pass situation at the current number. I understand why people got in on Morales early. Hey, physical intangibles, all those things. I see it. But I'm just saying Jake Matthews doesn't seem like a complete flake to me. He converted religions. He seems like he's hanging out with more serious people. Again, it's not my cup of tea, but I'm just looking at a guy who seems like he takes his career a lot more seriously now, his training, his discipline, all those things. So it should be a fun fight, man. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I can answer.
Please, Rich, go ahead.
I can answer some of them questions as well, man. Matthews isn't going to wrestle offensively. If he gets his submission, it'll be a club and sub, or if Morales is feeling brave, he'll try and take Jake down, and maybe Jake gets a guillotine. He's got a nice guillotine. So that's that one. And I can't even remember now. I was listening to you go, man. But yeah, I don't think the reach will matter so much from Morales. I agree. He's an athlete to me, Morales. I don't think his ceiling's very high. He is big for the weight class. He does have a solid chin. He has been cracked before, and it hasn't deterred him in any way. I just don't think people should be laying the chalk price on him, man, in this one. I've even seen someone parlay fucking -600 Talbot with Morales at -300. That's just wild to me. But yeah, I think Jake's the side, man. It's a dog or pass situation. I put Morales as mush of the week this week as well. So let's see if we can keep that train continuing.
Well, we'll see. Just wanted to address one thing in the chat before we move on. converting religions, do whatever you want. As long as it's free will, do whatever you want in this life. Not endorsing that message, brother. And as far as I'm concerned, the only reason I bring that up, it's not because I care about what your religion is or anything like that, but he just went from a guy who seemed like he wasn't taking his career as serious to a guy who said, like, if you listen to Jake Matthews interviews, it's important to him, his faith. So I just think that how a fighter approaches the fight, I'm willing to take them at their word. And I just feel like Jake Matthews is a lot more serious now about his career, about his preparation, about his discipline. So however you find that in life, I wish you the very best. But in any case, we can move to the next fight here where we got Brendan Allen taking on Paul da Berju Craig. And this is a main event for the ages, middleweight showdown. And I'll tell you what, Rich, I watched a lot of Brendan Allen footage before the fight. And you tell me if you disagree with any of this, but I said this as my write-up analysis. Craig's striking and chin leaves a lot to be desired, but Allen gets hit clean versus Silva, Muniz, Strickland, Curtis. He was out-wrestled by Malkoun. He should have lost that fight, in my opinion. He can get tagged and finished. Pick has to be Allen. Faster, cleaner striking mechanics, more proven cardio, more proven middleweight, but Craig has sneaky body kicks. He matches Allen on size and length, which a lot of guys do not do and have not done. And both men have competed at 205 pounds before. So these are guys that Brendan Allen fought Sam Alvey at 205, Sean Strickland at 195 catchweight. So he's a big fellow. But same thing can be said for Paul Craig, right? So two big guys cutting down to 185, right? Both of them got to sacrifice a little bit for the cut. But I definitely think Allen's the more proven guy at the weight. He's fought tough guys. He's been in a number of these fights. Some of them have gone long, right? Into third rounds, second rounds. And we've seen broadly good stuff from him. But when I'm looking at this guy, I definitely see him getting tagged in every fight. I see him wearing damage in almost every fight. The one fight that stands out from that is the Punahele Soriano fight, where he just dog walked him for 15 minutes with his own body kicks, with his length. And I was impressed by that performance. But we've seen Puna has struggled a little bit at the UFC level, translating with his size and his physicality and his wrestling game. So I look at Brendan Allen and I say, he can be out wrestled. It's happened before, but it's not easy. And it's not easy to wrestle him and hold him down. He's a guy that scrambles. He creates those dynamic opportunities. But we've also seen him in dicey situations. Let's not forget, I do think that people, I always think it behooves you to go back and watch older fights when people have struggled, if they've been on a really good run, because it'll just give you some reminders of what could go wrong. Kevin Holland took this guy's back in the first round and looked like he was about to close the show on him. And Brendan Allen was able to stay composed, deal with it, get out, and then submit Kevin Holland. Impressive stuff, but also dicey situation, right? Put himself in some vulnerable spots. Against Jacob Malkoun, he almost always swept and got on top with like a minute left. But it was like with a minute left in each round, like my man was underneath, stuck in bad positions for a lot of that fight, a lot of situations. And some of the takedowns from Jacob Malkoun, guys, were takedowns that are working in high school wrestling rooms. Just like run into somebody, they fall over a little bit, grab the leg, and just pull them over. So do I see Paul Craig having that kind of takedown success? God, no. Jacob Malkoun, a lot more functional with his wrestling. But I was impressed by Paul Craig's wrestling last time out. Am I crazy for thinking that I was impressed that he's taken down Muniz multiple times? I know Muniz isn't the best wrestler in the world, but he's a wrestler and grappler first and foremost. Paul was able to shuck off some of his takedown attempts, and he's normally the guy with the blast double that works, right? Muniz goes blast double and bodies hit the floor because he's a big guy with a broad back. But then you look at what happened. Paul Craig goes out there and hits a beautifully timed level change, blast double, head in the chest, takes Muniz right to the ground, passes his guard, beats the shit out of him, almost submitted him with the Darce, and then passes to the mount and finishes him. And I was like, man, this guy Paul Craig is getting better. He's still trying to improve in his career. He says, I'm after gold. I'm not looking for anything less than that. And so it's shit or get off the pot time for Paul. So I do think this is a money line underdog or pass situation. I think that the ends by KO is interesting here as well, because I look at these two guys, and here's the one danger. I think that Brendan Allen is an exceptionally good finisher on the mat when somebody's hurt. I love his jiu-jitsu. When he is passing and somebody's hurt, dude, it's clinical. He moves through the situations very fluidly. He knows exactly where he wants to go, and he's got really long arms. The chokes are just disgusting. So I think he could very easily submit Paul Craig, but the number is like plus 230. I don't love that, right? I don't think that that's a really standout number. So for me, the numbers that kind of stood out here, I'll run you through, and then I'll kick it right over to you, Rich, which was Ailin by decision. And I think that the chances of this fight going to decision are very slim. But again, you've got a massive favorite here who's plus 750 by any method. That just caught my eye. I was like, man, that's kind of interesting because we've seen against Puna, he just stood on the outside, landed kicks, had no intention of finishing that fight at any point, I didn't feel. So what if Paul Craig, who doesn't have the best proven cardio at 185, who is pretty tepid in his pace and performance against, Muniz until he got the takedown, I do think we could look at a little bit more of a staring match here, which has kind of pushed me off the fight not to start round 3. Initially, I was trying to look for some violence bet here. It's all chalk to shit, man. I can't really get behind it at the numbers. I think it's the most likely outcome, but I would want playable numbers. For Craig, the KO is almost 12-1. Craig by sub, which is normally an auto bet for me at light heavyweight, is 7-1 here. And I don't think he's necessarily better than Brendan Allen, but Brendan Allen I have seen hurt. I've seen him rocked. And if you're not sober-minded, it doesn't matter how good you are at grappling. You can get choked out. Same thing if you start to gas out at any point. And I do think Brendan Allen typically has very good cardio. But who is able to keep up with him in the grappling and the scrambles most of the time? Not a lot of people. Most of the time, people are taking the check very early. And I do question whether Paul would take the check if it's a grappling fight. Because I think maybe he'll gas out by the 3rd round, but Paul Craig has 3rd round finishes. He's been there in those tough fights that went long where he took a beating and then he found the finish late. So those are a couple of things that stood out to me. The early round props with specific methods, you can get pretty big numbers as well. So that would be my way to play the violence as opposed to maybe the chalked out minus 190, looking at a couple of contrarian props. But you're getting basically, 28-1 on Craig KO1, 40-1 on Craig KO2, 66-1 on Craig KO3. And I know that it's not extremely likely, but when I look at Brendan Allen's chin, man, it just gives me real pause. I thought Bruno Silva had him badly hurt at one point, and that was a fight that didn't last that long. Then he hurt Bruno Silva. He got the finish. He had a huge ground advantage there. As soon as he hurt Bruno Silva, he just easily dices him. No resistance on the mat. Against Muniz, bro, Andre Muniz is not the cleanest striker in the world. He throws with power, but he's not the cleanest striker. He landed several times, and one time he landed, and Brendan Allen goes and just like popped back like a Pez dispenser, and the commentary was like, wow, in round 1. By round 2, Muniz is doing the huffing and puffing, like he was the big bad wolf. So I think that both these guys, fun, scrappy style. I think somebody's getting finished brutally here. And Brendan Allen's the guy that they're trying to put in the driver's seat. He's got a lot behind him. Young guy, early finish props, early submission props for Brendan Allen. Very live here. But I just have seen this guy fumble the bag before. I've seen him do it as a favorite. I've seen him get overconfident. I've seen him out there talking shit and then get folded up. So I just think that Brendan Allen is capable of making dumb decisions, making critical errors. That minus 450, 81%. He's a little too volatile for that, for me. Go ahead. Tell us what you think, Rich.
I like the Allen side. Before props come out, I wanted Allen by KO. And then it was released at like 125, which isn't good enough for me, so I can't play that. I think that Craig moving down to 185 was a desperation move. I think he had enough at light heavyweight, and this is his like resurgence in his career. I've heard him talk about chasing gold as well. It ain't happening, to be honest. I think he loses this fight. I think he probably gets KO'd. I like the later rounds just purely by the numbers, and also from a stylistic standpoint. I think it's probably going to be Brendan Allen round 2 or 3, most likely. I bet Craig, man, against Muniz by KO, and I had Brendan Allen against Muniz as well, because it's just like every fight's different. Obviously, we always say that. But yeah, I didn't like Craig in round 1 against Muniz, man, and I think it's because it was his first time at 185. He was being reserved. He doesn't really know how his cardio is going to hold up. I think it's a bit of a cut to get down to 185. He's been working at the PI in Vegas for this camp, trying to get his weight down. And yeah, I think that's half the battle for him now at 185. He's making the weight, man. I think he's still pretty much untested at 185. The Muniz bout didn't tell us much. It was over quite quickly, beginning of round 2. And he wasn't really pushed in that fight, man. Muniz is a jiu-jitsu guy. So I think the jury's still out on Craig at 185. I think Allen is full of confidence. I know he's got problems, man. and I've capitalized on him in the past against Strickland, Curtis. I think he's a bit of a mental midget sometimes if things aren't going his way, if he gets discouraged. I think he knows pretty much, like in the Strickland fight, he knew he wasn't going to win that fight, and he just goes a bit guns blazing sometimes and thinks, fuck it, I'll just go out on my shield, see what happens. But Craig hasn't got the hands to trouble him on the feet, in my opinion. I don't think Craig's got the wrestling to get Ailin down. I think, like you said, it's going to be a staring match for a round, feel each other out, see what happens. And then in round 2 or 3, I think Ailin's going to connect. His hands have been improving at Killcliff. He really impressed me against Bruno, against the fence, man. Just his shot selection, staying calm in the pocket against, a killer in Bruno, who's a decent stand-up striker. So yeah, I think Craig is going to get fucked in round 2 or 3, man, and probably TKO. So I might play them numbers. I'll see what lines I can get, but I think Ailin gets the win. And the most thing I can point out is the confidence, man. He's on like a 3-fight winning streak. He's probably going to get maybe a title shot off this one, or he's certainly a contender in the division now, man. He's built his way back up. So I like him, man. I like him to get it done. And I like Craig as well. He's a fun guy. But unfortunately, I think he takes an L here, man.
Yeah, and what makes me curious about this one is Brendan Ailin, obviously the younger guy, 27 years of age, and the UFC's tried to build him up before. I don't know that they expected him to get beat on by Sean Strickland, but now that Strickland's the champion, could be a sellable rematch. Something that you always want to keep in the back of your mind. They did talk a lot of shit. Extreme Couture 2-1 against Brendan Ailin. They did get the win with Sean Strickland. They got the win with Chris Curtis, but Mr. Nixick, the coach over there, did point out to me that they dropped the ball there with Punahele Soriano. So they haven't always gotten one over on him. But Brendan Ailin certainly would like to get that one back. And I think that he'll have earned it if he's able to do the job on Paul Craig this weekend. So I definitely agree with you about the Brendan Ailin side, in terms of his improvements, right? I think that we've seen Brendan Ailin get much better on the feet. His offense hasn't ever been the problem, right? Not on the ground, not striking, really. It's just been the defense for me. And I do think that we're seeing a little bit more toughness and a little bit more mental resolve from Brendan Ailin as well. Not to say he wasn't tough before, but he would kind of panic when he got put in those bad situations. I think we saw that against Chris Curtis, got hit a couple times, started to doubt himself, then got hit to the body, fights over shortly thereafter. With Sean Strickland, it was an accumulation, right? He started, he landed a couple shots, he's talking, and then it was like Abus Magomedov, right? He just walked him down until he wanted no more. He was just beating on him against the fence. Sean Strickland never looks that aggressive, but I'm telling you guys, at the catch weights up above 185, Sean Strickland is all that more effective. I don't know why. Maybe he just lands with more power when he doesn't have to cut the weight, but Sean Strickland beat up Imavov at a catch weight. He beat up Brendan Ailin at a catch weight. So a couple of things to take note of there. Brendan Ailin is going to be at 185 pounds here as the much more comfortable natural guy at the weight, younger guy. So I think it's price prohibitive, but again, some of the ways I'll look to potentially play it, the early props, like you mentioned. On the KO side, you're not going to do great numbers, but you're seeing really big numbers on the sub. Ailin sub 2 plus 1,200, Ailin sub 3, 22-1. And I do think that one thing I note about him is Paul Craig, good offensive jiu-jitsu. His ground game defensively a little bit void at times because he's so aggressive, right? And aggressive people can do good things, but they can also put themselves in really compromised situations. And if you fatigue or if you get hurt, which I think is also very possible here, then the submissions come easy. Brendan Ailin is extremely coachable, right? If you watch Brendan Ailin in that fight with Bruno Silva, he hurts him so bad. Bruno Silva was as good as finished, okay? But instead of following up, he looks over at his corner. He's like holding him down to the ground, looks over at his corner. His corner's like, pass and take his back. And he's like, all right. It's like, okay. And then just straps it in. So I feel like Brendan Ailin will do whatever he's told to do by his corner in this fight. Extremely coachable guy, 27 years of age, clearly getting better. So should win, lean towards the violence here, but it's a tricky fight for me. And I definitely will preference the ends by rather than the Ailin methods because they're so nerfed on the Ailin side. So with that being said, guys, we've done it. 14 fights, big ass card here. And I think that we've done it justice. We've certainly tried to do that. If you guys have questions, comments, concerns, please go ahead and fire those off in the comment section below this video. Happy to address those over the course of fight week. Also, if you guys think I should grow back the beard, let me know that in the comments. If you vote Team Mustache, then put that in the comments as well. I'd really appreciate your feedback in that regard. But with that being said, Rich, another great show in the books. Please tell the people where they can find you, my man.
Yeah, same shit, man. Twitter, Patreon, link in the bio. We've also got a cool Discord group if people want to join that. So yeah, hit me up, man.
Absolutely love it. And for me, guys, you can always find my information in the description box below. That's the Lab VIP. That's my own personal Patreon, as well as the work that I do with Luca Fury. So you can find all that stuff in the description. You can find the podcast version of this show and a first look if you just search Liam Picks Fights on your favorite podcast platform. Also, if you don't want to have to go through the searching, that is also conveniently linked in the description below. So any other questions, comments, or concerns, you can fire off in the chat. But the last thing we'll leave you with is enjoy the card, enjoy the fights. God bless you all, and come back next time. We're having all the same fun again. Thanks, everybody.